So feedback is obviously vital to what we do as teachers, and as a school we've come a long way in looking at assessment for learning, which is obviously how we feed back to pupils, and more importantly how they act on that feedback. What we had with the curriculum for Wales, I think, was an opportunity to work much more closely cross-phase with our cluster school. And we had a deputy head teacher, we have our deputy head teacher who led that really, really well, got all of our cluster involved in discussing our pedagogy and evaluating our pedagogy. It was a great opportunity for us. We were happy with where we were, but we needed to crystallise it, get an idea of exactly what we meant by assessment for learning in our school. I had a group of pupils called the Learning Leaders or Learning Champions. We liked to go around to other schools to see how they do things, and they liked to go particularly back to their primary schools. So we went to visit a few primary schools to look particularly at assessment for learning. And one of our schools that we worked with quite closely on planning for the Science and Technology AOLE produced some books that we were really impressed with. And we loved the approaches to assessment for learning and how pupils were responding to feedback so much that we asked, could we visit and have a little chat with those pupils? So when we could see in action these strategies, there were 7 strategies that were built in through the course of primary school, from one for year 1, year 2, year 3 and so on, building up to one called ROSE, which is reflect on and self-evaluate their learning, where pupils were writing up to a page of reflection, really quite sophisticated reflection on their own learning. So we liked this and we thought, well, let's see if we can build on this. So with the opportunity of working with the cluster, it was agreed that some funding would be given to one person particularly to lead the project. I think that really helped because we were able then to build a strategic plan, look at what our aims were as a cluster, and then that person could meet once a half term, I believe, to look at action plans with each individual school, including ourselves, and then evaluate the progress against those action plans. I think if we hadn't had that one person leading, it would have been more difficult to coordinate, but that meant that we all had an input in our own way and that what we were doing was right for our venue, our school as well. So we then had additional funding through EAS. Mick Waters and James Kent were involved in gathering us together to meet, and it was really nice that Professor Mick Waters, who obviously has been involved in the writing of the curriculum for Wales, was really quite pleased with what he saw happening between the clusters. So that gave us a new impetus, a new momentum to follow through. With the aim being, and we think we've got quite close to achieving some of that already, that when our pupils come up to us from various different cluster schools, there are 4 to 5 schools that we work very closely with, they will all come up with a similar understanding of assessment for learning. Maybe not exactly the same strategies, although we have trialled some strategies across all of our schools, like the one called ROSE, as I mentioned, the one called Tell a Friend, where pupils will literally just tell a friend or write to their friend what they've learned during that lesson, which is really good as a way of understanding whether that pupil has taken on board what's been learned. We did a learning conversation and a book look this year in October with pupils in year 7 from our cluster schools who had been through this process over the last 2 years, since September 2022, and also some pupils from non-cluster schools. And it was interesting to see how confidently the pupils, particularly from the cluster schools, could talk about their use of, for example, 2 stars and a wish, which is what they used in primary school, which becomes in our school what went well and even better if, so WWW and EBI. The use of purple pen, which I know was a gimmick brought in a few years ago, PPP, Purple Pen of Progress. It's really been established here for many, many years, but constantly needs updating and reviving. But all of our pupils who came up now from the cluster primary schools knew what Purple Pen of Progress was, what it was for. And rather than pupils in the past saying things like, thanks for the feedback, I'll try better next time, these pupils were able to talk much more closely about the success criteria and evaluate their own progress far more effectively, we felt, than perhaps they had been able to prior. So over the 2 years, we feel like we've come quite a long way in terms of working with the clusters so that our year 7s come up to us, they know what Purple Pen is, they know what WWEBI are, and they're used to reflecting on their work at a quite high level. So the impact of all this work that we've done on feedback, on learners, on families actually, is that I think we've developed a much more interesting way of reporting to pupils and to families. Because we needed to move away from obviously national curriculum levels, we needed to look as a high school particularly at how we did more formal types of assessment. These are low stakes assessment, very much in keeping with assessment for learning, but we felt that it was important that pupils had some feedback on how they were doing. So we developed with all of our teachers in school, all of our pupils in school, a colour-coded system that took quite a while to refine, that got to a point where we were quite happy with it, where pupils have a colour allocated to them each half term when we do a progress check that tells them how well they're doing in that subject so that they get a feeling for which subjects they need to improve on, and then also how much effort and engagement they're putting into their work. So the engagement is a gold, silver, bronze, so that's a nice sporting analogy. The pupils quite like the competitive nature of that. And then the colour code that we use for their assessment, for their progress, is basically blue, green, amber and red. We talked a lot about how that sat with the pupils, how they felt about it. The pupils are really happy to have the red. They feel like they need that kind of focus, that they know exactly where to improve. How this helped us with the cluster and with the pupils themselves is that pupils are much more able to talk about their progress now. I had a meeting this morning with my Raising Standards pupils. There are 7 Year 8 boys who particularly needed a bit of a boost, and each half term they like to see their colour-coded report, and they like to tell me straight away where they've gone up from amber to green, where they've gone up from bronze to silver. And I did a little quiz with them this morning, which they quite liked, where I said the subject name and they had to guess and try and remember which colour they were, and they were really, really accurate. They told me which subjects they think they needed to work harder on and which subjects they think they'd made a lot of progress on. So that was great. How we've used that with the cluster. When we met with Mick Waters and we showed this system to him, he was quite intrigued by it and asked us to consider Year 6 teachers giving us a colour code, professional judgment-based colour code, before the pupils come up to us. And we tried this with our one cluster school. It worked really, really well. She didn't say it was a particularly onerous task. It was roughly based on literacy and numeracy, but just professional judgment about the pupils. And what it meant is that when those pupils came up to us, I was able to identify a small group for enhanced transition, again, my Raising Standards group. And I was able to, I didn't share necessarily with them what the colour code that their primary school teacher gave them was, but I was able to talk to them about their progress in other subjects. And they all felt that that was a real little help. And they were the pupils who had been amber or red or bronze from their primary school teacher. We wouldn't have had that opportunity before. So now the cluster have agreed to do that cluster wide. So it means that before Year 7 come in, I will already know who I want to work with to support their progress. The cluster do strongly feel, and we've done a lot of discussion with them, they love the gold, silver, bronze, but they are not so keen on the other colour codes. They're going to use those for us, but they feel that they're not so appropriate for the pupils. So that's how we work. We've negotiated with the cluster and found a system that we're all happy with, that families understand.
So in our work we have this mark scheme called WWW and EBI. So EBI would be like even better if. So we would decide, so us or our peer would decide what we need to work on, and we would write it in our books. And WWW stands for what went well. So it's again either ourselves or our peer, and you write what you've done well.
Sometimes we use tables or we write stuff about what we did or need to improve on next time. So we could use numbers in the tables, or we could write a paragraph about what we need to work on next time. So we then use this to figure out what we need to do on our next attempt of that assessment and what we need to keep on doing in the rest of them.
Having feedback helps us improve our learning by knowing what we did well and what we can improve on for next time. In my geography, I had to write all about if deforestation was good or bad for the environment, and I had to make 2 ideas, and sometimes I misspelt my I's. I didn't do them in capitals, I did them in lowercase, and my teacher circled that. And in the EBI, I had to write to improve on my capitals and my grammar for the next time.
It also helps us improve because our teacher usually puts an example on the board of our standards of what we should be. and if it's not up to that standard, then that's okay, and we kind of improve on what we can do better. So like Lois said, like what went well in EBI, and sometimes underneath my writing, Miss will put a little thing going, please add more punctuation next time.
The local authority sets out in its county plan that we're looking for strong outcomes and achievement for all learners across the local authority. Within that, then, what we're trying to do and trying to fit in with the themes and ideas of Curriculum for Wales, we're really trying to promote cluster-based working. So we're working with clusters from across our local authority. We've got 6 in Torfaen, focusing on different areas, and it's been great to follow the work and support the work of the St Albans cluster in terms of how they've developed their marking feedback arrangements. It's been great to learn how that's worked at putting the child really at the centre of that piece of work, and then thinking from 3 all the way through to 16, how they're supporting those pupils, so they're getting consistency from their various primary clusters, feeder schools coming into a secondary school, and then the sort of the difference that's making in terms of outcomes for our learners, and taking it all the way back to that much wider agenda of the focus around great outcomes for all learners in Torfaen.